I was 42 years old the night I sat in my truck in the dark, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, trying to understand why the woman I loved had been lying to me for months. I didn't go looking for the truth. That's the part I keep coming back to. I wasn't suspicious. I wasn't snooping. I just showed up early. My name is Brennan Calloway. I'm a licensed electrician out of Oakville, Ontario. Been doing it for 19 years, which means I've spent nearly 2 decades crawling through attics in February and rewiring basements that should have been condemned. I'm not a dramatic person. I don't look for problems. Most days I just want to finish the job, drive home, and make dinner. That's the kind of man I am, or thought I was, until the night everything I believed about my own life turned out to be a story someone else had written for me. Her name was Cassandra. Cassandra Lane Pruitt, 38 years old, a registered nurse who worked at a walk-in clinic in Burlington. We'd met at a mutual friend's backyard Canada Day party 3 years earlier. She was standing near the cooler arguing about whether poutine from a food truck counted as real poutine, and I walked over to settle the debate. I said no, absolutely not. Real poutine needs a proper kitchen, and at least 20 minutes of prep, and she looked at me like I'd said something both wrong and fascinating at the same time. We talked for 4 hours. I drove her home. I called her the next morning. People talk about knowing. I never believed in that before her. But with Cassandra, I genuinely knew within 6 months that I was going to marry this woman. She was sharp and funny, and she had this way of listening where her whole body paid attention. She remembered everything. What you said, what you meant, what you almost said but didn't. She was the most present person I'd ever been around. We got engaged on a Tuesday night, which sounds unromantic until you understand that Tuesdays were our night. Every week since the beginning we'd had Tuesday dinner together, just the two of us, no phones, no plans after. I'd made her favorite, chicken with lemon and herbs, roasted potatoes, and I had the ring in my jacket pocket, and my hands were shaking so badly, I spilled wine on the tablecloth. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. That was 14 months before the night in the truck. The engagement was good, better than good. We started looking at houses in the spring, talked about whether we wanted kids, argued pleasantly about what kind of wedding we wanted. She wanted something small and outdoors. I wanted to invite everyone I'd ever met and have a band. We compromised on something in between. My mother adored her. Her parents, Lloyd and June Pruitt, both retired school teachers who lived in Hamilton, were warm and kind every time I saw them. Everything was where it was supposed to be. The cracks, if I'm being honest, were small enough that I explained them away. She'd get quiet sometimes, not sad exactly, just somewhere else. She'd be sitting right next to me and I could feel her leave the room. I'd ask if she was all right and she'd say yes, of course. Sorry, just tired. Nurses are always tired. That's not a secret. I accepted that. There were moments when a conversation would shift in a direction I didn't understand. Some small topic would come up, a news story, a comment from a friend, something on television, and she'd suddenly change the subject with this efficiency that I can only describe now as practiced. Like she'd done it so many times it had become reflex. At the time I just thought she didn't like conflict. A lot of people don't. The wedding was 8 weeks away when it happened. A Thursday evening in October. The light was already gone by 6 o'clock the way it does in Ontario in the fall. That early darkness that always takes me by surprise no matter how many times I've lived through it. I'd finished a job in Mississauga, and the drive back was faster than I expected. I thought I'd stop by Cassandra's apartment before heading home. She was having dinner with her parents that night. She'd mentioned it earlier in the week, and I figured I'd say hello, maybe stay for an hour. I didn't call ahead. That part matters. I should say that. I wasn't being secretive or testing anything. I just didn't think to call. When you've been with someone for 3 years, you stop announcing yourself for every visit. That's just what happens. Her building is a low rise on a quiet street. Her parents' car was in the visitor lot. I buzzed and she didn't answer, so I used the spare key she'd given me 8 months earlier. I took the stairs because her elevator is unreliable. Her apartment is at the end of the hall on the 2nd floor. I was about 20 feet from her door when I heard it. The door wasn't fully closed. It was open maybe 2 inches. She'd probably left it ajar to let some air in. She always ran warm. And the voices were clear enough that I could hear every word before I'd even reached the welcome mat. Her mother was speaking first. "Cassie, sweetheart, you have to tell him. You cannot do this. You cannot walk into a marriage with this between you." And then Cassandra, "Mom, I know that. I'm going to tell him. I don't know how. I don't know what it does to us." Her father, quieter, measured the way retired teachers are measured. "He's a good man. You know he's a good man. Give him the chance to be that man. I'm terrified, Dad. I know you are. A pause. Long enough that I'd stopped walking entirely. Long enough that I became aware of my own breathing. Then her mother again. He's going to find out eventually, Cassandra. If not from you, then from a blood test, from a doctor visit, from something, and then it won't just be the secret. It'll be that you kept it. That's so much worse. I stood in that hallway and I did not move. I know, Cassandra said. Her voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. I know. I'm so ashamed of it. You have nothing to be ashamed of, her father said with a firmness that surprised me. Nothing. What happened to you was not your fault. Do you hear me? I didn't hear what came next because the blood was loud in my ears. I turned around and walked back down the hall, down the stairs, out through the lobby. I sat in my truck in the dark for a long time. Here is what I knew. Something had happened to Cassandra. Something she was hiding from me. Something her parents knew about. Something her mother believed would come out in a blood test or a doctor's visit. I knew what that pointed toward, and I didn't know what to do with that. I drove home. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat at my kitchen table until almost midnight, and I thought about the woman I knew. 3 years of Tuesdays, the Canada Day cooler, the lemon chicken, the ring in my jacket pocket, and I tried to fit what I'd heard in that hallway into what I understood about her. What happened to you was not your fault. Her father had said it like it was something he needed her to believe, not a polite reassurance. An argument he was still making. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning I called in to delay my first job by 2 hours, and I drove to the clinic where Cassandra worked. I didn't go inside. I parked across the street and I asked myself one question for about 40 minutes. What kind of man do you want to be? Not what kind of man does she deserve, not what is the right thing to do. I'd get to that. But first, what kind of man am I? I thought about my dad, Wayne Calloway, who'd been a plumber for 35 years and had a philosophy about problems that I'd grown up with. You don't walk away from a job because it's harder than you expected. You figure out what's actually wrong before you decide whether you can fix it. I drove to her apartment. I texted her to say I was there. She let me in. She looked like she hadn't slept either. We sat in her kitchen and I told her, as gently as I could, what had happened. That I'd come over, that the door was open, that I'd heard enough to know something was wrong, and that I loved her and that I needed her to tell me. She put her face in her hands for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were red, and she was holding herself very still, the way people hold themselves when they're trying not to fall apart in front of someone. I don't know where to start, she said. Start wherever feels easiest. She laughed, this short, sharp sound that wasn't really a laugh. There's no easy part. She told me, 4 years earlier, before we'd met, she'd been assaulted. A man she'd trusted, not a partner, not someone she'd been close to romantically, but someone in her extended social world, someone who'd come to a gathering at a friend's house. It happened once. She'd gone to the hospital. She'd reported it to the police in Hamilton. She'd done everything she was supposed to do. The case went quiet. The man denied everything. There wasn't enough physical evidence, she was told, to proceed. The detective assigned to her case, a woman named Karen Betts, was thorough but overworked, and after several months Cassandra stopped hearing from her. She understood, in the way victims come to understand these things, that the system had moved on even if she hadn't. What she had not anticipated was the diagnosis that came 6 weeks after the assault. HSV-2, herpes simplex virus. She sat across from a doctor she'd never met and received information that felt, in that moment, like it was erasing her future. She'd spent years learning to live with it. She took medication daily. She was fastidious about her health, informed in the specific way that nurses are informed. She understood the statistics, the transmission risks, the way the virus behaved. She had built a livable life around it, but she had never told anyone she was dating about it before reaching what she described as a certain threshold of trust. And with every relationship she'd had in those 4 years, 2 before me, neither of them serious, she had disclosed it before things became physical. With me, she'd told me early on, quietly, that she had a medical condition she managed with daily medication. I remembered it. I'd asked if she was okay and she'd said yes, it was managed, nothing to worry about. I hadn't pushed, I trusted her. And because we had both, for different reasons, chosen not to be physically intimate before the wedding, she had her reasons, which I was only now beginning to fully understand, and I'd respected that without asking for explanation. The conversation she owed me had never found its moment. She had been trying to find the right way. For weeks, she said. She kept starting and stopping. She didn't know how to say it without losing me. I was afraid, she said, that you'd think I was dirty or damaged, and I couldn't stand the thought of you looking at me that way. I reached across the table and I held her hand. I had a lot of things moving through me in that moment. I won't pretend it was simple. It wasn't simple. There was fear in there, and confusion, and the grief of something changing that I hadn't expected to change. But underneath all of it, the loudest and the clearest and the most stubborn thing was this. She was the same woman she had been the day before. The same woman from the Canada Day party. The same woman who argued about poutine and listened with her whole body and said yes before I finished the sentence. What happened to her was not her fault. I don't think you're damaged, I said. I think you've been carrying something alone that you didn't have to carry alone. She started crying. We talked for 3 hours. I asked questions. She answered them. Real questions. About the virus, about her health, about what our life would look like, about what she needed from me. She was a nurse. She knew how to explain it clearly and honestly, and I respected that. By the time we were done, I felt like I understood something I hadn't understood before. About her and about what she'd survived. We didn't cancel the wedding. I went home that evening and I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my dad. I told him most of it. Not every detail, but enough. He was quiet for a while after I finished. Then he said, "Well, what do you want to do?" "I want to marry her, then marry her." Just like that. "Brennan," he said, "marriage isn't a contract you sign when everything is easy. It's a decision you make when things are hard. You're making it now. That's earlier than most people have to." I thought about that for a long time. I should say this clearly, because I want anyone who's in a situation like this to understand it. I did my research. I talked to my own doctor, Andrea Foss at a clinic in Oakville, who was patient and thorough and did not make me feel foolish for any of the questions I asked. She explained the virus, the medication, the risk factors, the ways couples in exactly our situation manage their lives together with honesty and care. She gave me real information, not reassurance. I needed real information. It is not a death sentence. It is not a reason to end a relationship. It is a medical condition that millions of people live with and manage every day. What it requires is honesty, which Cassandra had been working up to giving me, and it requires a partner who is willing to be informed rather than reactive. I tried to be that partner. We got married in late November on a Saturday at a small venue outside Burlington, with exposed wood beams and string lights and exactly 43 people who mattered to us. It snowed. Cassandra wore a deep ivory dress and her mother cried from the moment they walked through the door. My dad stood beside me at the front and handed me the ring when the time came and squeezed my shoulder once, the way men in our family say the things they don't say out loud. It was the best day of my life. What I have not told you yet is what happened 6 months later. I have spent most of my adult working life as an electrician, but for the 3 years before I met Cassandra, I had also been a part-time investigator with a private security and insurance firm. Background checks, insurance fraud documentation, missing persons work when they needed an extra set of eyes. I'd let that side work go quiet when the electrical business picked up, but I had kept my license and I still had connections. I'm telling you this because it matters for what comes next. 2 months into our marriage, Cassandra started having a harder time. Not with us. We were good, genuinely good, closer than we'd been before in the way that people get close when they stop keeping secrets. But she was struggling quietly with something I recognized as unfinished business. The man who had assaulted her had never faced any consequence. He was still somewhere in the world, still in the social orbit of people she'd once known, still living his life without any acknowledgement of what he'd done to hers. She wasn't asking me to do anything. She wasn't asking me to be her avenger, but I could see it wearing on her. I made some calls. The case number from her original report was still on file with Hamilton Police. I reached out to a contact I had there, not asking for special treatment, just asking who the current assigned investigator was and whether the file was still open. It was. It had never been formally closed. It had just gone cold. I also did what I do. I started looking. The man's name was Theodore Griggs, 36 years old at the time of the assault, now 40. He'd moved since then. He was in Brantford now, working at a logistics company. He was not careful about his digital footprint. What I found over 3 weeks of methodical work was a pattern. Griggs had been named in 2 other complaints, one in Hamilton, one in Guelph, both of which had also gone quiet in the same way Cassandra's case had. Different women, different circumstances, same outcome for Griggs, which was no outcome at all. I brought everything to a detective sergeant in Hamilton named Frank O'Duya, 51 years old, 23 years on the force, who took the file and looked at me across his desk for a long moment before he said anything. "You put this together yourself?" Yes, you know I have to verify all of this independently. I know. That's why I documented everything. He looked at the file again. Why didn't you just send this anonymously? I thought about that. Because she deserves to know someone stood up and put their name on it. Franco Duya worked the case for 11 weeks. He was methodical and thorough, in a way that I gathered had not characterized the original investigation. Though I'll let others draw their own conclusions about why. What I know is that by the time he was done, Theodore Griggs had been charged with 3 counts of sexual assault. All 3 complainants had agreed to participate in the process. The evidence, taken together and documented properly, was substantial. Griggs was convicted 8 months later. He received a sentence of 4 years in a federal institution, with conditions attached to his release that would follow him for the rest of his life. I didn't tell Cassandra what I was doing while I was doing it. I told her after I had something real to tell her, after the charges were laid, after there was something certain instead of something that might fall apart and hurt her twice. She sat very still when I explained it. She asked me to repeat certain parts. When I was done, she was quiet for a long time. You did all of that, she said finally. It wasn't quite a question. It needed doing. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't want to give you hope and then have it come to nothing. You'd already been through that once. She looked at me in a way I don't know how to describe properly, like she was seeing something she hadn't fully expected to be there. Brennan, she said, I need you to know something. Okay, when I was standing at that altar in November, she said, I genuinely thought that I was the luckiest person in that room. And I've thought that every day since. She paused. But right now, today, I think I understand why. I'm not someone who cries easily. I did not cry then, but it was a close thing. We live now in a house in Burlington that we bought last spring, a semi-detached, on a street with good neighbors, and a backyard big enough for the garden she wanted. On weekday evenings she comes home from the clinic, and I'm usually already there because my jobs end earlier, and I make dinner most nights because she carries a lot at work, and cooking is how I unwind. We still have Tuesday nights. We haven't missed one. People ask me sometimes, friends, my brother Ian, even my dad once, what it was like. That whole period, the hearing outside her door, the conversation in her kitchen, the wedding in the snow. And the honest answer is that it was the hardest 6 months of my life, and also the period in which I became, most clearly, the man I wanted to be. I have thought a lot about what it means to love someone, really love them, not just enjoy them when it's easy. I think it means deciding, when the information changes, to stay curious instead of scared. It means asking questions instead of making assumptions. It means remembering that the person in front of you is a whole person who has lived a whole life, and that the parts of that life that were painful are not shameful, and that what they need from you is not a verdict but a witness. Cassandra didn't need me to save her. She had survived what happened to her long before she met me. She was functioning and whole, and working and living and loving with full intention. What she needed was to stop carrying the secret alone. That's a smaller thing than saving someone. But I think it might be the more important thing. If you're out there and you're in a situation like hers, carrying something you think will cost you the relationship, the life, the person you love, I want to say this as plainly as I can. The people who deserve to be in your life will not run from the truth. They will sit with you in your kitchen and ask questions and hold your hand. And if they can't do that, then you've learned something important earlier rather than later. And if you're out there and you're in a situation like mine, standing in a hallway hearing something you didn't expect, I want to say this: you don't have to have the answer right away. You're allowed to go sit in your truck for a while. You're allowed to not know. The only question that matters is the one I eventually asked myself: what kind of man do you want to be? I decided in that parking lot. I'd decide the same way again.